80,000 men rode into Hungary. In 4 days, the kingdom ceased to exist, and not one Hungarian soldier ran. King Bela IV of Hungary was not a fool. He had read the reports. He had received the refugees, tens of thousands of Cuman nomads pouring across his eastern borders in 1239, their leader Khitan riding into his court with a warning carved into his face like a scar. The Mongols were coming. They had already devoured the Rus. They had shattered the They were, Khitan told him, unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Bela, listen. He allowed the Cumans to settle within Hungary's borders, a decision his own nobility immediately hated. Here's where it starts to unravel, because the Hungarian nobles didn't see a military asset in those Cuman refugees. They saw foreigners. They saw rivals for land. They saw an excuse. When rumors spread, likely planted, possibly Mongol engineered, that the Cumans were secretly working with the invaders, the Hungarian mob didn't wait for evidence. They stormed Khitan's quarters and murdered him. His head was thrown from a window. And with that 60,000 Cuman cavalry, the one force that might have matched the Mongols on open ground, turned around, abandoned Hungary, and rode south into Bulgaria, burning everything they passed through on the way out. Bela had just lost his best weapon, and the Mongols hadn't even crossed the border yet. By late 1240, the Mongol commander Baito Khan, grandson of Genghis, had assembled the largest single invasion force ever directed at medieval Europe under the operational genius of Sabbatai, arguably history's greatest military mind. The army had been divided into multiple columns, each designed to strike through a different mountain pass simultaneously. This was not brute force. This was choreography. While one column drove through Poland, obliterating a combined German-Polish force at Legnica, the main army under Bato and Sabbatai punched through the Carpathians and poured into Hungary from 3 directions at once. Bela's scouts brought him numbers that seemed impossible. He didn't disbelieve them, but there was nothing to do except fight. He sent urgent letters to Pope Gregory IX, to Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II, to every crowned head in Europe. None of them came. Frederick and the Pope were busy fighting each other over Italy. The Knights Templar wrote back with condolences. The King of France offered prayers. Hungary would face this alone. There is something quietly devastating about that image. A king who knew exactly what was coming, who asked for help with every diplomatic tool available to him, who received nothing. He would have to use what he had. By March 1241, Bela had assembled an impressive force, somewhere between 60 and 100,000 men, depending on the source. Knights, infantry, archers, and the remnants of his Cuman allies. He marched them east toward the Mongol advance and camped them on the western bank of the Sayo River near the village of Mohi. It looked like a strong position. The river protected his right flank. A stone bridge crossing gave him a single, defensible point of engagement. He ordered a wagon lagar, a fortified ring of wagons chained together surrounding the camp. He posted guards on the bridge through the night, and Sabbatai, watching from the other bank, saw every single one of those decisions, and smiled, because Bela had made the classic mistake that great commanders throughout history have lured their enemies into making. He thought he was setting up a defense. He was actually building a cage. Here is what Bela did not know. While he was watching the bridge, while his guards stood through the cold night counting Mongol campfires on the other bank, Sabbatai had already taken a significant portion of his force 40 kilometers south. He'd found a ford, a place where the Sayo could be crossed without the bridge. By the time Hungarian sentries spotted the main Mongol force attempting to seize the stone bridge, the trap was already half set. The bridge fight was real. The Mongols were repulsed once, twice. Hungarian knights drove them back with heavy casualties. In the early hours of April 11th, Bela's men must have felt something like confidence. They had held the bridge. The Mongols had retreated. The river still stood between the two armies. And then, just before dawn, they heard it, not from the east, not from across the river. From the south, Subbutai's flanking force had crossed the ford. They were already behind the Hungarian lines. What happened next is one of the most efficiently executed military destructions in the medieval record. The Mongols attacked the wagon lugger from multiple sides simultaneously. Stone-throwing siege engines, catapults, the Mongols had learned to build from Chinese engineers, hurled projectiles into the camp, burning naphtha stones. What some sources describe as smoke bombs, early gunpowder compounds designed to cause chaos and blind the defenders. The Hungarians had never seen anything like it. Their wagon fort, designed to keep enemies out, was suddenly filled with fire and screaming horses and men who couldn't tell which direction the attack was coming from. Bela's military commanders made the decision to break out. They could see an opening. The western side of the encirclement appeared thinner, less defensive, a gap in the Mongol lines. They took it. It was not a gap. It was a corridor. Sabbatai had left that opening deliberately, wide enough to look like an escape route, narrow enough to funnel the Hungarians into a killing ground. As the army poured westward, believing they were breaking free, Mongol-like cavalry ran alongside them on both flanks, not attacking, just herding. Letting them run? Letting panic do the work. When the Mongols finally closed the corridor, what had been a retreat became a massacre. Thousands of Hungarian knights, men who had not broken, had not fled in cowardice, had simply been outmaneuvered by a plan designed weeks in advance, were cut down in the marshes and fields west of the Sayo. The Archbishop of Esztergom was killed, the Archbishop of Kalaksa. Bishops, barons, the flower of Hungarian nobility, dead in a single morning. Contemporary sources place the Hungarian dead at somewhere between 10 and 60,000 men. Modern historians estimate around 20 to 30,000, a staggering loss for a medieval state. In 4 days of campaigning, the Mongols had effectively destroyed the Hungarian military as a fighting force. What followed Mohi was not a conquest. It was a consumption. The Mongols spent the remainder of 1241 moving systematically through Hungary, burning cities, destroying harvests, and killing with a thoroughness that medieval chroniclers struggled to describe without abandoning their faith. The city of Pest was razed. Esztergom, the seat of Hungarian Christianity, was sacked. Entire regions were depopulated. Bela himself escaped, barely. He fled west, then south, chased through Austria by Mongol pursuit parties. Emperor Frederick, the same man who had ignored his letters, actually imprisoned him briefly for the insult of arriving at his court as a refugee. When Bela managed to reach the Adriatic coast and the fortified island of Troger, he was the king of a country that had largely ceased to function. Here is the number that most people don't know. In the year following Mohi, Hungary lost an estimated 15 to 25% of its total population. Some regions, the Great Eastern Plains, lost over half. Not just killed, starved, displaced, broken. The land itself was damaged, crops burned, livestock stolen, the agricultural infrastructure of generations dismantled in months. And then, and this is the part that bends the mind, the Mongols left, in the spring of 1242, with nothing standing between them and the rest of Europe. With Vienna, perhaps 6 weeks of hard riding away, the Mongol army turned around and rode east. This is the question that has consumed historians for 8 centuries. The traditional explanation is that Gedai Khan, son of Genghis, the great Khan who had authorized the campaign, died in December 1241. But Tua and Subutai needed to return to Mongolia to participate in the succession politics that would determine the next ruler of the largest empire the world had ever seen. That explanation is probably partially true, but there's more to it. Recent scholarship has pointed to something else. Dendrochronology, the study of tree rings, has revealed that 1241 and 1242 were years of unusual climate instability across Central Europe. The winter of 1241–42 had been unusually cold and wet. The spring thaw came early and turned the Hungarian plains into a quagmire. Mongol military doctrine depended absolutely on mobility. Their horses needed open, dry steppe conditions to operate at peak efficiency. Bog and marsh and flooded river plains were not their environment. For an army that had crossed the Gobi Desert, surviving a wet Hungarian spring should have been trivial. But an army of that size requires staggering quantities of fodder and food, and both were now either destroyed or inaccessible. The Mongols had burned Hungary so thoroughly that they could no longer feed themselves within it. The very success of their destruction had made continued occupation impossible. Let that land in your chest for a moment. Hungary survived, not because it was not because Europe rallied to its aid, not because Biela found some reserve of military genius. Hungary survived because the Mongols had been too efficient, because the land they had stripped couldn't sustain them, because of wet springs and dead cattle and fields of ash. A kingdom preserved by its own devastation, Balafor returned to a country in ruins. And here is where his story becomes, unexpectedly, one of the great recovery stories in medieval history. Because Biela did not collapse, he rebuilt. He modernized the Hungarian military, recognizing that light cavalry alone was not enough. He encouraged stone castle construction on a massive scale. Over the next decade, Hungary went from one of the least fortified kingdoms in Europe to one of the most He repopulated devastated regions with foreign settlers, Germans, Slavs, Saxons, offering land grants and legal privileges in exchange for rebuilding what had been destroyed. He also brought the Cumans back, the same people his nobles had betrayed. He arranged for his son to marry a Cuman princess and embedded Cuman cavalry permanently into the Hungarian military structure. When a second Mongol invasion came, and it did, in 1285, the army that met them was unrecognizable from the one that had been destroyed at Mohi. The second invasion was defeated, but the world that rebuilt itself after 1241 was not the same world that had existed before. Something had cracked in the European imagination. The Mongols had exposed something deeply uncomfortable, that Christendom's political fragmentation, its rivalries, its failure to function as anything resembling a unified military bloc, was not a theological problem or a diplomatic inconvenience. It was an existential vulnerability. Pope Innocent IV convened a council at Lyon in 1245, partly to address the Mongol threat. He sent diplomatic missions east, trying to negotiate, trying to understand. The Franciscan friar John of Plano Carpine rode all the way to the Mongol capital at Karakoram and came back with a letter from the Great Khan that has to rank among history's most audacious diplomatic documents. The Khan's response to the Pope's appeals for peace and Christian conversion, essentially, you come to us, submit, or we finish what we started. Europe did not submit. The second Mongol wave broke against fortified Hungary and Polish resistance. The Mongols found other directions to expand: Persia, China, Korea, Southeast Asia. The Great Western Campaign ended not with a treaty, not with a crusade, but with a slow reorientation. The Steppe Empire looked elsewhere. Europe exhaled. Stand on the banks of the Sayo River today, and it asks nothing of you. It is a small river in a quiet country. Fishermen, birds, the sound of water over stone. There is no great monument to what happened here, no Thermopylae-style shrine to the dead, just a river. And somewhere beneath the soil, the suggestion of 20,000 men who marched out to fight something they'd never seen before, with the tools they had, while the rest of the world watched and did nothing. They weren't defeated because they were cowards. They weren't defeated because their king was weak. They were defeated because they met the finest military operation of the 13th century, perhaps of the entire medieval age, without allies, without intelligence, and without time. And the man responsible for that operation, Sabbatai, never lost a major battle in his entire career. 40 years of campaigning. 32 nations invaded. 0 defeats. We remember the names of the kings and the fallen kingdoms. We forgettese. History has a way of doing that, remembering the wounds and forgetting the surgeon. Next time you hear someone say Europe was saved by its faith, or its unity, or its divine protection, remember the Sayo River. Remember that Hungary survived because it rained. If Mohishuki and Itsul, there are 2 rabbit holes I'd point you toward. The first is Sabbatai himself, a man born a blacksmith's son, who became the most successful general in recorded history. We have a full video on him, and I promise it will change how you think about military genius. The second is what happened in Poland 3 days before Mohi. At a town called a German-Polish army was wiped out on the same day as part of the same coordinated strategy. 2 battles, 800 miles apart, executed simultaneously. The link is in the description. Watch it. And if you've got something from this video, if it lended the algorithm genuinely works on likes and comments more than anything else, tell me down below, was this a defeat? Or was it a trap that was simply inescapable? I'll see you in the next one.